The Charleston Historical Society prided itself on preserving the rich tapestry of the city's past. On a humid September morning in 2024, Eliza Thornton, the Society's head curator, received a call that would forever change her understanding of history and perhaps reality itself. "Ms. Thornton, we found something during the Belvadier house renovation," said Jack Porter, the contractor overseeing the restoration of one of Charleston's oldest plantations. "A hidden compartment behind the library wall. There's a painting and something else." The Belvadier house had stood since 1794, surviving wars, earthquakes, and hurricanes. Owned by the prominent Caldwell family for generations, it had recently been donated to the Historical Society when the last Caldwell died without heirs. Eliza arrived at the plantation within the hour. The late morning sun cast long shadows across the white columns of the veranda as she hurried inside. Jack led her to the library, where a section of the wall had been removed, revealing a small space barely 2 feet square. "The compartment was sealed with plaster and wallpaper," Jack explained. "We'd never have found it if we weren't replacing the damaged section." Inside the hidden space was an ornate wooden box. Its brass hinges had turned green with age, but the lock remained intact. Eliza carefully lifted it out, feeling the weight of history in her hands. "Do you have the key?" she asked. Jack shook his head. "No key, but there was this." He handed her a yellowed envelope. The paper was brittle, the ink faded. Addressed to the finder, the letter was dated May 15, 1854, and signed by Thomas Caldwell. "What lies within must never see the light of day," Eliza read aloud. "The portrait brings nothing but sorrow. May God forgive us for what we've done." A chill ran down her spine despite the muggy Charleston heat. Such dramatic warnings were rare in historical documents, especially from the typically stoic Caldwell family. Back at the Society's conservation lab, Eliza carefully broke the lock on the box. Inside, wrapped in silk that had barely deteriorated, was a daguerreotype in a silver frame. The early photographic process captured a wedding portrait of a handsome man in formal attire, standing beside a woman in an elaborate wedding dress, her face obscured by an intricate veil. "William Caldwell and Elizabeth Montrose, 1854, read the inscription on the back. "That's odd," Eliza murmured to her assistant Marcus. "Thomas Caldwell's brother William supposedly never married. Our records show he died of fever before his wedding." Marcus peered at the image. "Maybe our records are wrong. Wouldn't be the first time." Eliza placed the daguerreotype under the digital microscope connected to their lab computer. As she increased the magnification on the bride's veiled face, something seemed off about the pattern. "Let me enhance this section," she said, focusing on the intricate lace. As the image clarified on the screen, Eliza gasped and stumbled backward, knocking over her chair. Marcus rushed to her side. "What is it? What did you see?" Eliza pointed a trembling finger at the screen. The veil, when magnified, revealed a pattern that was not lace at all, but an impossible arrangement of tiny, agonized human faces, their mouths open in silent screams. "That can't be real," Marcus whispered, leaning closer to the screen. "It must be a trick of the light or degradation of the image." But as they increased the magnification further, the horrific details only became clearer. Each face was unique, expressions frozen in terror, some appearing to stare directly at the viewer. "This isn't possible," Eliza said. "Daguerreotypes didn't have this kind of detail, and no one would create something so disturbing." Outside, thunder rumbled as an unexpected storm gathered over Charleston. The lights in the lab flickered momentarily, and for a second, Eliza could have sworn she heard distant screaming. By evening, rain pounded against the windows of the Charleston Historical Society as Eliza pored over genealogical records of the Caldwell family. The daguerreotype sat on her desk, covered with a cloth. She couldn't bear to look at it directly anymore. "William Caldwell, born 1829, died 1854, she read aloud, scanning the family Bible records. Cause of death, brain fever, no mention of a marriage. Marcus returned with a stack of leather-bound journals. I found Thomas Caldwell's personal diaries. The Society acquired them in the 1970s, but they've never been fully catalogued. Eliza grabbed the journal from 1854, flipping through the pages until she reached May, the month the warning letter was dated. Thomas's usually neat handwriting became increasingly erratic as May progressed. On May 10th, he wrote, "William's obsession with Elizabeth grows more disturbing. He speaks of her beauty as though she were an angel, yet none of us have been permitted to see her face. Always that damnable veil. Father insists the wedding proceed despite my concerns." May 12th. The wedding preparations continue. Elizabeth remains in the East Wing, refusing all visitors. The servants whisper that they hear her speaking to herself in languages unknown to them. William dismisses my concerns, saying only that his bride has unique talents that will bring glory to our family. May 14th. God help us all. The wedding was a catastrophe beyond words. What we witnessed when she finally removed her veil. I cannot describe it here, lest someone read these words and think me mad. William is gone. Elizabeth too. Though what became of her I dare not speculate. 7 guests dead of shock or their own hand before morning. We tell the town it was cholera. The portrait will be sealed away where no human eyes can find it. The final entry, dated May 15th, simply read, "I have written the warning. May whoever finds it heed it better than we did." "This doesn't make sense," Marcus said. 7 unexplained deaths would have been recorded somewhere else. Eliza turned to her computer and searched the Charleston death records from May 1854. Sure enough, there was a spike in deaths, 8 in total over 2 days, all connected to the Caldwell family or prominent Charleston families likely to have attended a Caldwell wedding. All listed as cholera, she noted. But Charleston didn't have a cholera outbreak in 1854. Thunder cracked outside, closer now, making both researchers jump. The lights flickered again, longer this time. "We need to know who or what Elizabeth Montrose was," Eliza said, trying to keep her voice steady. A search through Charleston's records revealed nothing about an Elizabeth Montrose during that period. Expanding the search to neighboring states yielded nothing. It was as if the woman had never existed. "Let me check something," Marcus said, turning to a database of Charleston's newspapers. He found the Charleston Mercury from May 1854 and scanned for any mention of a Caldwell wedding or the mysterious deaths. There was nothing about a wedding, but a small item caught his eye. Peculiar astronomical event. Citizens report strange lights above the harbor on the evening of May 13th. Professor Wilkins of the college suggests a meteor shower. May 13th, Eliza repeated, the day before the wedding. As night deepened, they discovered one more piece of evidence, a letter from a visiting English merchant to his wife, dated May 15th, 1854. Most peculiar rumors circulate about a tragedy at the Caldwell plantation. The official word is disease, but a servant I encountered spoke of a bride whose face was not of this earth, and guests who died of fright at the sight of her. Superstitious nonsense, of course, but I find myself eager to conclude my business and return home. Eliza stared at the daguerreotype, still covered on her desk. "We need to examine it more closely," she said reluctantly. "There might be something we're missing." As she reached for the cloth, the building's power failed, plunging them into darkness. The backup generator hummed to life seconds later, bathing the room in dim emergency lighting. When Eliza's eyes adjusted, she noticed something alarming. The cloth covering the daguerreotype had shifted, and beneath it, though it should have been impossible, the silver frame seemed to glow with a faint, pulsing light. The rain intensified as midnight approached. Eliza and Marcus huddled in the conservation lab, surrounded by emergency lights and the intermittent flashes of lightning through the windows. The daguerreotype remained partially covered on the examination table. "We should wait until morning," Marcus suggested, eyeing the photograph warily. Better lighting, more people around. Eliza shook her head. I can't explain it, but I feel like we're running out of time. She pulled her phone from her pocket. Let's at least document everything properly. She carefully removed the cloth and positioned her phone's camera above the daguerreotype. Through the screen, the wedding portrait looked almost normal until she zoomed in on the veil. The faces. They've changed position, she whispered. Marcus looked over her shoulder, his face pale in the blue light of the phone screen. The tiny, agonized faces in the veil pattern had indeed shifted. Some now appeared to be looking directly at Eliza and Marcus, their expressions even more desperate. That's not possible, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Daguerreotypes are fixed images. They can't change. Eliza took several photographs, then switched to video mode, slowly scanning across the portrait. As the camera passed over the bride's veiled face, the screen distorted with static for a split second. When she played back the video, that moment of static resolved into a single frame of something else entirely. Not the veiled bride, but a glimpse of what appeared to be beneath the veil. A face that was almost human but wrong, in subtle, terrifying ways. Eyes too large and positioned asymmetrically, a mouth that extended too far across what should have been cheeks. What the hell? Marcus breathed. A notification popped up on Eliza's phone. Battery critically low. The phone died seconds later, despite having been at 85% charge just minutes before. Thunder crashed directly overhead, and the emergency lights flickered out completely. In the perfect darkness, Eliza heard Marcus's panicked breathing beside her, and something else, a soft sound, like distant whispering in multiple voices. The emergency light sputtered back on, revealing the daguerreotype still on the table. But now, a thin line of what looked like black liquid was seeping from under the frame. "We need to leave," Marcus said, grabbing Eliza's arm. "Now!" Boom. As they backed away, Eliza's eyes remained fixed on the portrait. She could have sworn the groom's expression had changed from solemn to smiling, a wide, unnatural smile that stretched too far across his face. They fled into the hallway, the emergency exit signs providing just enough light to navigate. Rain lashed against the windows as they hurried toward the main entrance. "We need help," Eliza said. "Someone who knows about these things." "What things?" Marcus demanded. "Haunted photographs? Brides with monster faces? This isn't exactly covered in curator school." They reached the main lobby just as Eliza's phone unexpectedly powered back on, vibrating in her pocket. The screen showed a text message from an unknown number. "You have seen, she knows." Below the message was an image, the same horrific, inhuman face they'd glimpsed beneath the veil, but clearer now. Looking at it made Eliza's vision swim and her stomach lurch. "Block the number," Marcus urged. "Delete the message." Before she could respond, a deafening crack of thunder shook the building and the front doors burst open. Wind and rain whipped into the lobby, carrying with it the scent of ozone and something else, something sickly sweet and putrid. In the doorway, illuminated by lightning, stood a figure in white. For one terrifying moment, Eliza thought it was a bride in a wedding dress. But as her eyes adjusted, she realized it was just a rain-soaked banner torn loose from the museum's upcoming exhibition, billowing in the wind. Marcus rushed to secure the doors, while Eliza tried calling 911. The call wouldn't connect. "No signal," she said. "The storm must have knocked out a tower." They barricaded themselves in the security office, where a battery-powered radio provided their only link to the outside world. The weather report confirmed what they already knew. Charleston was being hit by an unexpected severe storm, with flooding reported in several areas. "Authorities advise all residents to shelter in place until morning," the broadcaster announced. "Multiple power outages reported throughout the historic district." Eliza found a flashlight in the security desk and checked her watch. 1:13 a.m. Hours until dawn. "We need to warn someone about the daguerreotype," she said. It's not just a creepy historical artifact, it's active, dangerous. Who would believe us? Marcus asked. Before she could answer, a sound from the hallway froze them both. The unmistakable rustle of fabric, like a heavy dress, dragging across the floor, moving slowly toward the security office. The dragging sound stopped just outside the security office door. Eliza and Marcus held their breath, the flashlight beam trembling in Eliza's hand. The door handle jiggled slightly, then nothing. After an excruciating minute of silence, Marcus whispered, "Could be the wind. Parts of this building are over 100 years old." Eliza nodded, wanting desperately to believe him. She trained the flashlight on the small window in the door, but the glass was frosted, revealing only shadows. "We need to understand what we're dealing with," she said, keeping her voice low. "The Society's archives are in the basement. If Elizabeth Montrose was real, there might be records the digital database doesn't include. You want to go to the basement? Now?" Marcus looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "We're trapped here until morning anyway," Eliza reasoned, "and I'd rather be doing something than just waiting." They listened at the door for several minutes. Hearing nothing but the storm, they cautiously emerged into the hallway. The emergency lights cast long shadows as they made their way to the basement stairs. The archives were even darker than the rest of the building, the only illumination coming from their single flashlight. Row upon row of shelves held boxes of documents, artifacts too mundane for display, and the accumulated ephemera of Charleston's long history. "Regional family records, 1800-1900, Eliza said, pointing to a section of shelving. "Start with M for Montrose." They searched methodically, the storm continuing to rage above them. In a box labeled Uncategorized Correspondence 1850-1860, Marcus found a letter that made him call out to Eliza. "Listen to this," he said. "It's from Virginia Hatton to her sister in Richmond, dated March 1854. Thomas Caldwell's brother has returned from his mysterious journey up north with a bride-to-be that none have been permitted to see. She remains veiled at all times, even in the privacy of their home, according to the servants. William claims she suffers from a rare condition that makes her sensitive to light, but rumors suggest other reasons for her concealment." Eliza frowned. So, Elizabeth was real, but where did she come from? And what was she hiding? Deeper in the archives, they discovered a section devoted to the Caldwell family. Among business ledgers and property deeds was a thin folder labeled simply, "William Personal." Inside was a journal much smaller than his brother's, with entries spanning from January to May 1854. William's handwriting was precise and small, detailing his journey to Massachusetts. February 12th, 1854. "Arrived in Salem today. The Montrose residence is not what I expected, more fortress than home. Mr. Montrose refuses to discuss his daughter's condition directly, but insists it is not contagious. The bride price he demands is exorbitant. Yet if she is as uniquely gifted as he claims, the Caldwell shipping interests will benefit enormously. February 15th. I have met Elizabeth at last. Though her face remains covered, her voice is hypnotic, her knowledge of maritime navigation systems extraordinary. She spoke of currents and passages unknown to any charts I've studied. With such insight, our ships could establish routes no competitor could match." The entries continued, describing William's growing infatuation despite never seeing Elizabeth's face. He wrote of her celestial beauty, glimpsed only through her veil, and her wisdom beyond mortal understanding. "Salem," Marcus said. "Wasn't that where—" "The witch trials, yes," Eliza finished. "But that was the 1690s. This is over 150 years later." They continued reading. William's later entries became increasingly bizarre, referencing Elizabeth's connection to the stars and knowledge not of this earth. He mentioned her special diet, consisting only of raw seafood and a strange liquid her father provided. The final entry, dated May 13th, 1854, the day before the wedding, was disturbing in its brevity. She promises that after tomorrow, once we are bound by their ritual and ours, I shall see her true face. She says, I will be the first human to gaze upon it and live. I am not afraid. Lightning struck close by, the thunder immediate and deafening. The flashlight flickered ominously. There has to be more, Eliza said, digging deeper into the box. At the bottom, wrapped in acid-free paper, was a small leather-bound book with no title. Inside, the pages were filled with strange symbols interspersed with English text. The Montrose lineage, descended from the deep ones of Innsmouth, maintains the ancient pact. Every third generation a daughter must take a human consort to renew the bloodline. The offspring of such unions possess the best qualities of both worlds, human appearance with extended life and the wisdom of the deep. The transformation begins at maturity, necessitating isolation from human society except for the chosen consort. Innsmouth? Marcus frowned. I've never heard of it. It's a fictional place, Eliza said slowly, a new dread washing over her. From H.P. Lovecraft's stories, the Deep Ones were a race of immortal, fish-like humanoids that interbred with humans. But Lovecraft wrote in the early 20th century, Marcus said. This document is from the 1850s. Unless it's an elaborate hoax, Eliza suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. The evidence was too consistent, too deeply buried in their archives to be a modern fabrication. The flashlight dimmed again, then went out completely. In the perfect darkness of the basement they heard it again, the soft rustle of fabric moving between the shelves, closer now. And beneath that sound, barely audible, the whisper of a woman's voice. William, have you come back to me at last? The darkness in the basement seemed to thicken, becoming almost tangible around them. Eliza fumbled with the flashlight, slapping it against her palm, but it remained dead. Don't move, she whispered to Marcus, and don't say anything. The rustling sound circled them, the whispers becoming more distinct. I've waited so long. They sealed me away, but never properly, always incomplete, always hungry. A sudden vibration from Eliza's pocket made her gasp. Her phone had come back to life. The screen illuminated, casting a pale blue glow that revealed glimpses of the archive shelves, but nothing moving between them. Run! Marcus hissed. Now! They bolted for the stairs, guided by the faint light of Eliza's phone. Behind them, the rustling accelerated, following close behind. As they reached the stairwell, Eliza risked a glance back. In the dim light, she caught a glimpse of something white, moving with unnatural speed. Not walking or running, but undulating, as if partly solid and partly liquid. They slammed the basement door behind them and sprinted through the hallways of the main floor. The emergency lights seemed dimmer now, flickering erratically. Outside, the storm had intensified, rain lashing against the windows with such force it sounded like fingernails scratching to get in. The conservation lab, Eliza panted. We need to get back to the daguerreotype. Are you insane? Marcus shouted over the storm. That thing is the source of all this. Exactly. Whatever's happening, it started when we uncovered the portrait. Maybe containing it properly will stop this. They rounded the corner to the lab and froze. The door stood open, emergency lights sputtering inside. The examination table where they'd left the daguerreotype was empty. It's gone, Marcus said, his voice hollow. Eliza's phone vibrated again, a new text from the unknown number. I am not contained. I am released. Below was a photograph of the Historical Society's front entrance, taken from outside, looking in. The timestamp showed it had been taken less than a minute ago. It's outside, Eliza whispered, or someone is. As if in response, a tremendous crash came from the lobby, the sound of the main doors being thrown open with terrible force. Wind howled through the building, carrying rain and the smell of salt water, much stronger than could be explained by the harbor several blocks away. Eliza's phone lit up with another message. The veil is lifted. The attached image made both of them recoil, a close-up of the inhuman face they'd glimpsed before, but now fully revealed. The features were a nightmarish blend of woman and something that had never been human. Eyes too large and oddly positioned, skin with a faint pattern like scales, a mouth that opened far wider than possible for a human jaw. "We need weapons," Marcus said, looking around frantically. "Against what?" Eliza countered. "A ghost, a hallucination, some kind of fish person? We don't even know what we're fighting." Her phone rang, the unknown number calling now. Eliza's finger hovered over the screen. "Don't answer it," Marcus pleaded. "We need to know what it wants," Eliza said, and pressed accept. At first, there was only the sound of water, not rain, but something deeper, like waves crashing in a vast ocean. Then a voice spoke, feminine but wrong, as if the speaker had only recently learned how human speech worked. "The portrait was my prison," the voice said. "Thomas Caldwell trapped part of my essence in it when I came for his brother. A partial binding, effective but incomplete. Now I am free and hungry after so long." "What do you want?" Eliza asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "A new consort," the voice replied. "The Montrose-Caldwell line must continue. The pact must be honored." The call ended abruptly. Seconds later, Eliza's phone chimed with a calendar invitation titled "Wedding," scheduled for dawn at Belvadier House. "This is insane," Marcus said, running his hands through his hair. "We need to get out of here, call the police." "And tell them what?" Eliza interrupted. "That we're being stalked by a 170-year-old fish bride? They'll think we're high on something." She paced the lab, thinking furiously. The letter said the portrait was a prison. If we could somehow restore it. A sound from the hallway silenced her, footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. Not the dragging rustle from before, but the confident stride of someone who knew exactly where they were going. A figure appeared in the doorway, a security guard, his uniform soaked. "Oh, thank God," Marcus said. "We need help. There's someone or something in the building." The guard said nothing, simply staring at them with an unnerving stillness. "Sir?" Eliza said, taking a step closer. "Are you all right?" Lightning illuminated the lab, revealing the guard's face in stark relief. His eyes were glassy and vacant, skin pallid with a faint greenish tint. When he opened his mouth to speak, his voice was not his own. "The bride approaches," he said in a hollow monotone. "She has waited long enough." Behind him, more figures appeared in the hallway. The night janitor, a homeless man who must have sought shelter from the storm, all with the same vacant expression, all speaking in unison now. "The wedding will proceed. The bloodline will continue. The pact will be honored." Eliza grabbed Marcus's arm and pulled him toward the emergency exit at the back of the lab. Outside, the storm raged with impossible intensity, the rain so heavy it was like running through a waterfall. "Belvadier House!" Eliza shouted over the deluge. "That's where this started. That's where it has to end." As they struggled through the flooded streets of Charleston, more figures emerged from the darkness. Ordinary citizens caught in the storm, all moving with the same purpose, all repeating the same phrases about the bride and the wedding. Behind them, from the direction of the harbor, came a sound that shouldn't have been possible in downtown Charleston. The deep, rhythmic roar of ocean waves crashing against a shore. The streets of historic Charleston had transformed into rushing rivers, the storm drains overwhelmed by the deluge. Eliza and Marcus splashed through knee-deep water, the wind driving the rain horizontally into their faces. Lightning branched across the sky in continuous writhing patterns that illuminated the city in stuttering bursts. "This way!" Eliza shouted, pulling Marcus down a narrow alley that would take them toward Belvadier House. The plantation stood on the outskirts of the historic district, normally a 20-minute walk from the Historical Society. Tonight, it might as well have been in another country. They emerged onto Broad Street to find it almost completely submerged. The grand old buildings of Charleston's most historic thoroughfare loomed like dark islands in a newly formed sea. And through the water, moving with disturbing coordination, came more of the entranced people, shopkeepers, tourists, residents, all with the same vacant expression, all repeating the same phrases about the wedding. "They're herding us," Marcus realized as they veered away from another group approaching from a side street. "No matter which way we turn, they're pushing us toward Belvadier." Then we go away they won't expect," Eliza said, pointing to a wrought-iron gate leading to St. Michael's Church Cemetery. "Through here." The ancient churchyard was a maze of above-ground tombs and monuments, many dating back to the Revolutionary War. In the chaotic light of the storm, the stone angels and weeping figures seemed to move, turning their heads to watch as Eliza and Marcus splashed between them. "What's the plan when we get to Belvedere?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible over the storm. "We don't even have the daguerreotype anymore." "I don't know," Eliza admitted, "but that's where the binding happened originally. There might be something there, records, tools, something Thomas Caldwell used." They reached the far side of the cemetery, only to find the gate locked. Marcus was about to suggest turning back when Eliza pointed to a mausoleum built into the boundary wall. "The Caldwell family crypt," she said. "I catalogued it last year for our records. It backs up against the outside wall. Some of these old crypts have drainage tunnels that lead outside the cemetery." The mausoleum door creaked open at her touch, surprisingly unlocked. Inside, the air was noticeably colder and carried the musty scent of old stone and older bones. Eliza's phone provided just enough light to navigate between the stone sarcophagi arranged in recessed walls. "There," she said, pointing to a small arched opening near the floor at the back of the crypt. "The drainage tunnel. It should lead outside the wall." The tunnel was narrow and claustrophobic, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees through several inches of cold water. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute, they emerged into an alleyway behind the cemetery. As Marcus helped Eliza to her feet, a new sound rose above the storm, singing. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of voices, all chanting in a language neither of them recognized. The sound came from all around them, echoing off the buildings of Charleston. "They're not just herding us," Eliza realized with growing horror. "They're preparing. The whole city is being turned into a wedding venue." They pressed on through flooded streets, avoiding the main roads where the entranced citizens moved in eerie procession. At one intersection, they glimpsed a macabre parade. A line of people walking through chest-deep water, carrying what appeared to be wedding gifts wrapped in seaweed and barnacles instead of paper and ribbons. Eliza's phone vibrated with another message. "My patience wanes. Come to me willingly, or I will take all of Charleston as my dowry." The attached image showed the harbor, where something impossible was taking place. The water was rising not just from the rain, but from what appeared to be a massive swell pushing in from the sea, a single enormous wave frozen in time, poised to crash over the entire peninsula. "She's going to flood the whole city," Eliza gasped. "Can she do that?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking with fear. "I don't know what she can do," Eliza admitted, "but I'm not willing to find out." They changed course, heading directly for Belvedere House now. The streets became less urban as they approached the outskirts, historic homes giving way to newer developments, and then to the sprawling grounds of the old plantation. Belvedere stood on a slight rise, its white columns ghostly in the storm. Even from a distance, they could see it was transformed. Every window blazed with light, not electric, but the flickering glow of hundreds of candles. The grand oak trees lining the drive were festooned with what looked like glowing algae, casting an eerie green illumination over the approaching path. And standing on the wide veranda, arranged in a perfect line, were dozens of Charleston's citizens, still entranced, still chanting, now dressed in sodden finery as if for a wedding. At their center stood the security guard from the Historical Society, holding something that gleamed silver in the strange light, the daguerreotype. "There it is," Eliza said. "If we can get the portrait—" "How?" Marcus interrupted. "Look at them. There must be 50 people up there." Before Eliza could respond, her phone lit up with a final message. "No more delays. The groom approaches. A chill that had nothing to do with the rain ran through Eliza as she realized the message wasn't referring to them approaching Belvadier. It was talking about someone or something approaching them. They turned slowly to find a figure standing in the road behind them. The lightning revealed a man in a formal suit from another century, his features handsome but strangely fluid, as if his face were reflected in rippling water. Though the rain fell all around him, not a drop seemed to touch him. "William Caldwell," Eliza whispered. The figure smiled, an expression that stretched too wide across his face. When he spoke, his voice was like the one on the phone, not quite human, using human words with inhuman inflection. "The groom awaits his bride," he said, extending a hand toward them. "One of you will serve, the other will feast. She is generous to provide a choice." As he stepped toward them, his movements too fluid to be natural, Marcus grabbed Eliza's arm. "Run," he said. "Get to the daguerreotype. I'll keep him busy." "Marcus, no!" But he was already charging at the William thing, tackling it with a desperation born of pure terror. The creature hissed, a sound no human throat could make, as they tumbled into the flooded street. "Go!" Marcus shouted, struggling to keep the increasingly inhuman figure pinned. Eliza ran toward Belvadier, heart pounding in her ears louder than the storm, knowing that whatever awaited her on the veranda might be worse than what she left behind, but seeing no other choice. Eliza splashed through the flooded grounds of Belvadier Plantation, the grand house looming larger with each desperate step. The immaculate gardens had become a swamp, ornamental hedges barely visible above the rising water. The storm had intensified to impossible levels, the rain so thick it was like running through a liquid curtain. On the veranda, the entranced wedding guests stood perfectly still, despite the howling wind, their blank eyes fixed on Eliza's approach. At their center, the security guard held the daguerreotype like a sacred object, his arms extended as if in offering. Behind her, a terrible scream cut through the storm, Marcus's voice, distorted by pain or fear or both. Eliza forced herself not to look back, focusing instead on the silver frame gleaming in the guard's hands. As she reached the steps leading up to the veranda, the assembled guests parted silently, creating a path to the main entrance. None tried to stop her. Instead, they began to sing again, that same unearthly chant in a language that made her ears hurt. The guard turned and walked mechanically into the house, still holding the daguerreotype. With no other option, Eliza followed. Inside, Belvedere House had been transformed. The carefully restored historic interior was now draped with what appeared to be fishing nets encrusted with bioluminescent sea life, casting a sickly, blue-green glow throughout the grand foyer. The air was thick with the smell of salt water and something else, an organic rotting scent that made her gag. Water covered the floor here too, several inches deep and rippling with movement that didn't match Eliza's footsteps. Something was swimming in it, small shapes darting between her feet, too fast to clearly see. The guard proceeded through the foyer toward the library, the room where the hidden compartment had been discovered. Eliza followed, each step requiring immense will to overcome her instinct to flee. The library had changed the most. The wall where the compartment had been found was now completely open, revealing not the small space they had discovered days earlier, but a vast chamber that couldn't possibly fit within the physical dimensions of the house. The guard placed the daguerreotype on an altar-like structure in the center of this impossible room, then stepped back to join the other entranced guests who had filed in behind Eliza, blocking her escape. The chamber stretched before her, its walls dripping with the same bioluminescent organisms that adorned the rest of the house. The floor was entirely submerged under clear water that seemed to grow deeper toward the far end, where shadows moved beneath the surface. "Welcome to my true home," came a voice from the darkness. The binding between worlds that Thomas Caldwell never fully understood. From the deepest part of the chamber emerged a figure that made Eliza's mind recoil. At first glance, it appeared to be a woman in a wedding dress, but as it drew closer, the wrongness became apparent. The proportions were subtly inhuman. Limbs too long, movements too fluid. The veil covering its face rippled despite the still air in the chamber. "Elizabeth Montrose," Eliza managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "That was the name I took among your kind," the figure replied. "My true name would shatter your mind to hear." She glided closer, barely disturbing the water beneath her. The daguerreotype on the altar began to emit a soft, pulsing light that matched the rhythm of the chanting from the entranced guests. "What do you want?" Eliza asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "To complete what was begun in 1854, Elizabeth said. "The Montrose-Caldwell line must continue. The pact must be honored. My kind provides knowledge and power to yours. Yours provides fresh bloodlines to ours. A mutually beneficial arrangement until Thomas Caldwell interfered." She gestured to the daguerreotype. "He used old magic he barely understood, binding a portion of my essence to this portrait, trapping me between worlds. Not fully here, not fully in my domain. For over a century and a half I have waited, influencing what little I could, until you finally released me." "And now what?" Eliza asked, trying desperately to think of a plan. "You want to marry someone and what? Have children? Create some kind of hybrid bloodline?" Elizabeth's laugh was like glass breaking underwater. "So primitive in your understanding. What I seek is transformation, the binding of two worlds through the union of their representatives. Your companion would have served well, but I see my first choice has already made his selection." From the entrance to the chamber came a wet, dragging sound. Eliza turned to see what remained of Marcus being pulled across the threshold by the thing that had once appeared to be William Caldwell. Marcus's body was limp, his skin now bearing the same faint pattern of scales that Eliza had glimpsed in the images of Elizabeth's true face. "The transformation has begun in him," Elizabeth said, "but is incomplete without the ritual. You, Curator, will complete our ceremony. You who found my prison, who studied my history, who understood enough to be dangerous, you will help bind our worlds properly this time." "And if I refuse?" Eliza asked, though she feared she knew the answer. "Then Charleston drowns tonight," Elizabeth said simply. "The wave I have called waits only for my command. Thousands will die, and I will simply find another candidate in the aftermath. Your cooperation spares them." Eliza looked around frantically, searching for anything that might help. The daguerreotype continued to pulse on the altar, the light growing stronger. "How?" she finally asked. "How would I complete this ritual?" Elizabeth glided to the altar and placed one elongated hand on the daguerreotype. "Thomas Caldwell used blood and silver to bind me. My essence remains connected to this prison even now. Destroy it completely, not just the image, but the silver itself, while speaking the words of unbinding, and our worlds separate forever. I return to my domain. Your city is spared." "Or?" Eliza prompted, sensing there was more. "Or speak the words of union, while adding your blood to the frame," Elizabeth continued, "and the binding strengthens. Our worlds connect permanently. Your kind gains knowledge beyond imagining, the secrets of the deep, of time and space. My kind gains access to new bloodlines, new potential. The ocean rises, but only enough to reshape your coastlines, not destroy them." The choice was impossible. Eliza had no way to verify that either option would work as promised. No guarantee that this creature from another world or dimension would honor any agreement. "The words," she said, stalling for time. "I don't know the words for either option." Elizabeth waved a hand, and the chanting from the entranced guests changed. Now they spoke in English, two different phrases alternating through the crowd. "Blood and silver, worlds apart, the veil between remains. Blood and silver, worlds entwined, the veil forever lifted. Unbinding or union, separation or connection, either way blood and silver were the keys. Eliza stepped cautiously toward the altar, her mind racing. The daguerreotypes pulsing had synchronized with her heartbeat now, the connection undeniable. Whatever her choice, she knew instinctively it would be irrevocable. As she reached for the silver frame, a memory surfaced, Thomas Caldwell's warning letter found with the portrait. What lies within must never see the light of day. The portrait brings nothing but sorrow. May God forgive us for what we've done. What had Thomas done exactly? Used blood and silver to bind Elizabeth, yes. But why had it been incomplete? What had he intended? Eliza's fingers touched the cold metal of the frame. The moment of decision had arrived. The silver felt unnaturally cold under Eliza's fingertips, sending a shock up her arm. The daguerreotype's pulsing light intensified at her touch, and the chanting of the entranced guests grew louder, more insistent. Elizabeth hovered nearby, her veiled face impossible to read. The thing that had once resembled William Caldwell had dragged Marcus's transforming body to the edge of the altar and now stood waiting, its features becoming less human by the second. "Choose," Elizabeth commanded, "separation or union. The tide will not wait forever." Eliza stared at the portrait, thinking furiously. Something about this situation didn't add up. If Elizabeth truly wanted freedom from the binding, why not simply tell Eliza how to destroy the daguerreotype from the beginning? Why the elaborate ceremony, the flooding of Charleston, the transformation of Marcus? Because she wanted union, not separation. The destruction of the portrait was never her goal. "Thomas Caldwell's binding wasn't incomplete by accident, was it?" Eliza said suddenly. "He did exactly what he intended. He didn't want to destroy you. He wanted to contain you." Elizabeth went perfectly still, the rippling of her veil ceasing. "Clever human," she said after a moment. "Thomas lacked the courage to complete either ritual. He chose a middle path, containment rather than destruction or union, cowardice disguised as wisdom. Or maybe he understood something you don't want me to know," Eliza countered. "Maybe complete separation would harm you more than containment. Maybe union would give you more than just access to our world." The chamber trembled slightly, water sloshing around their feet. Outside, the storm intensified, the building groaning under the assault of wind and rain. "Enough speculation," Elizabeth hissed, her voice losing its human quality. "Choose now, or watch your city drown." Eliza took a deep breath and lifted the daguerreotype from the altar. The moment it left the surface, the chanting stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, she could hear the storm outside, the creaking of the house, and a new sound. A distant roaring that could only be the massive wave Elizabeth had summoned, finally beginning its approach to Charleston. "I've studied history my entire professional life," Eliza said, her voice steadier than she felt. "The past speaks to those who know how to listen, and what I've learned about the Caldwells, about you, about this ritual, tells me neither of your options is the truth." She turned the daguerreotype over, examining the back where the inscription identified William and Elizabeth. Beneath the formal text, barely visible in the pulsing light, were tiny symbols scratched into the metal, the same symbols she had seen in the leather-bound book from the archives. "Thomas left instructions," she continued, "not in his warning letter, but here, on the binding itself. He knew someone might find it one day and face this same choice." Elizabeth moved closer, the water around her feet beginning to boil. "You cannot read those symbols. No human can." "I don't need to read them," Eliza said. "Their presence alone tells me what I need to know. Thomas didn't fear separation. He feared union. The binding wasn't incomplete. It was exactly as strong as he dared make it." With sudden decision, Eliza pressed her thumb against the sharp edge of the silver frame, drawing blood. But instead of speaking either of the phrases the entranced guests had chanted, she spoke words she had read in Thomas's journal. "Blood of my blood binds you still. Neither free nor fully joined, the veil remains, the worlds between. What was bound shall stay bound, renewed and strengthened." She smeared her blood across the daguerreotype surface, covering both William and Elizabeth's images. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Elizabeth shrieked, a sound that shattered the windows of the library and sent the entranced guests collapsing to their knees. The water in the chamber began to churn violently, the impossible depth at the far end collapsing in on itself like a drain being unplugged. "What have you done?" Elizabeth wailed, her form flickering between the veiled bride and something far more monstrous. "This binding will hold for another century and more." "Exactly," Eliza said, holding the daguerreotype firmly despite the pain as it grew hot in her hands. Not destruction, not union, containment, renewed and strengthened. The William thing lunged for her, but its movements were sluggish now, as if it were moving through thick syrup. Before it could reach her, its form began to dissolve, flowing like water back toward the daguerreotype in Eliza's hands. Elizabeth's shrieking rose to an impossible pitch, her veiled form stretching and contorting. "You doom yourself!" she cried. "The binding works both ways. What holds me now holds part of you." Eliza felt it then, a pulling sensation, as if something essential was being drawn out of her and into the daguerreotype. Her vision blurred, and for a moment she glimpsed something beyond the chamber, beyond Belvadier House. A vast, dark ocean where enormous shapes moved beneath a sunless sky. With the last of her strength, she pressed the daguerreotype against her chest, directly over her heart, and repeated the binding words. The silver frame burned against her skin, and she screamed in pain, but didn't let go. Elizabeth's form collapsed inward, spiraling like water down a drain, pulled inexorably toward the portrait. The William thing had already disappeared entirely, and now Marcus's transformed body began to revert. The scales receding, his natural coloring returning. The chamber itself was contracting, the impossible space folding back into the dimensions of the normal library. The entranced guests were waking, looking around in confusion, their memories of the night already fading like a half-remembered dream. As Elizabeth's essence was drawn completely into the daguerreotype, her final words echoed in Eliza's mind rather than her ears. "Until next time, Curator, a century passes quickly for my kind." Then she was gone. The daguerreotype went cold in Eliza's hands, the pulsing light extinguished. Outside, the storm began to subside almost immediately, the distant roar of the approaching wave fading away. Marcus groaned and sat up, rubbing his head. "Eliza? What happened?" She looked down at the daguerreotype. The image had changed. Now it showed not just William and Elizabeth, but included shadowy figures in the background. Thomas Caldwell, recognizable from his portraits in the Historical Society, and, most disturbingly, Eliza herself, her expression solemn and knowing. "I renewed the binding," she said quietly. "I bought us some time." Dawn broke over Charleston with unexpected clarity. The storm had vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind flooded streets and widespread damage, but nothing like the devastation that had threatened. Emergency services reported numerous water rescues and power outages, but miraculously, no fatalities. Eliza sat in an examination room at the Medical University of South Carolina, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Doctors had been puzzled by the perfectly symmetrical burn on her chest, a rectangular mark exactly the size and shape of the daguerreotype, but found no other physical injuries. Marcus leaned against the wall nearby, still pale, but recovering. His memory of the night was fragmented. He remembered the creature that had once been William Caldwell attacking him, remembered pain and a sensation of drowning on dry land, but nothing after that until waking up in the library at Belvadier. "What do we tell people?" he asked quietly. Eliza glanced at the door, ensuring no medical staff were within earshot. "The truth, or at least part of it. We found a historical artifact that turned out to be dangerous, some kind of toxic compound in the old photographic chemicals. It caused hallucinations, temporary psychosis. The storm was just bad timing. And the mark on your chest? The fact that half the city was sleepwalking last night. Side effects of the toxin, she said with a shrug. As for the sleepwalking mass hysteria triggered by the storm, it's happened before in history. Marcus didn't look convinced, but he nodded anyway. And the daguerreotype? Secured, Eliza said. She had insisted, despite her condition, on personally locking the portrait in the Historical Society's most secure vault before allowing herself to be taken to the hospital. I've already started the paperwork to have it classified as a hazardous historical artifact, too dangerous for study or display. A doctor entered with discharge papers, and they fell silent. 20 minutes later, they stood outside the hospital in the bright morning sunshine. The city was already bustling with cleanup crews and repair teams, Charleston's residents pulling together as they had through hurricanes and earthquakes for centuries. What really happened last night? Marcus asked as they walked slowly toward the Historical Society. What did you do to stop her? Eliza touched the bandage beneath her shirt, the burn still throbbing dully. I renewed the binding Thomas Caldwell created. Not permanent freedom, not permanent union, a temporary containment. She's trapped in the portrait again, at least for now. For how long? I don't know. Thomas's binding lasted about 170 years. Hopefully, this one will last at least as long. They walked in silence for a block before Marcus spoke again. She said something to you at the end, didn't she? I remember that much. Her voice, not in my ears, but somehow inside my head. Eliza nodded reluctantly. She said, until next time, and that a century passes quickly for her kind. So this isn't over. No, Eliza admitted, just postponed. But that's how history works, isn't it? Each generation deals with the problems it can and leaves records to help the next generation face what it couldn't solve completely. At the Historical Society, they found Jack Porter waiting outside, looking confused and anxious. Ms. Thornton, thank God you're okay. The strangest thing, I woke up in the library at Belvadier this morning with about 30 other people. No one remembers how we got there. The storm was intense, Eliza said smoothly. A lot of people sought shelter wherever they could find it. The old house is on high ground. Jack accepted this with visible relief. Well, that explains it, I guess. Listen, about that hidden compartment and the box we found. Already taken care of, Eliza interrupted. The artifact has been secured in our vault. It contains some unstable chemical compounds that could pose a health risk. I'll need you to seal up that compartment completely, rebuild the walls stronger than before. Of course, Jack said. I'll get on it right away. After he left, Marcus gave Eliza a searching look. You're going to document everything, aren't you? Leave records for whoever comes after us, when she tries again. Everything I can, Eliza confirmed, but not for public access. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share widely. They entered the Historical Society building, where staff were busy cleaning up minor damage from the storm. In Eliza's office, she unlocked her desk drawer and removed a leather-bound journal, new but crafted to match the style of Thomas Caldwell's diaries. I've already started, she said, opening the journal to reveal pages of careful notes about the daguerreotype, Elizabeth Montrose, the Caldwell family, and the binding ritual. Future curators of the Historical Society need to be prepared. Marcus studied the journal, then looked up at Eliza with newfound respect and concern. There's one thing I still don't understand. Elizabeth said the binding works both ways, that it would hold part of you as well as her. What did she mean? Eliza was silent for a long moment. Finally, she unbuttoned the top of her blouse, just enough to reveal the edge of the bandage, and beneath it, visible along her collarbone, the faint pattern of scales that had begun to appear on her skin. I'm connected to her now, she said quietly. I don't know what that means yet, but I intend to use it. Knowledge is power, Marcus. The more I understand about her and her kind, the better prepared the next generation will be. But the risk is mine to take, she finished firmly. Now, help me finish this documentation. We have work to do. 1 year later, Charleston had largely recovered from what meteorologists had dubbed the anomalous deluge of 24. The storm had become a footnote in the city's long history of surviving natural disasters, remarkable only for its sudden onset and equally sudden disappearance. At the Charleston Historical Society, Eliza Thornton had been promoted to director following the retirement of her predecessor. Her handling of the storm's aftermath and preservation of the Society's artifacts had impressed the Board of Trustees, none of whom knew the full truth of what had happened that night at Belvadier House. Marcus had left Charleston 6 months earlier, accepting a position at a museum in Denver, about as far from the ocean as he could reasonably get. Before leaving, he had extracted a promise from Eliza that she would call him immediately if her condition worsened, or if there were any signs of the binding weakening. So far, there had been no need for such a call. The scaled pattern on Eliza's skin had neither spread nor receded, remaining confined to her upper chest and shoulders, easily hidden by clothing. The only other lingering effect was the dreams, vivid visions of that vast, dark ocean and the shapes that moved within it. Sometimes, in the dreams, Elizabeth spoke to her, words that Eliza could never quite remember upon waking. On the anniversary of the night at Belvedere, Eliza worked late at the Historical Society, completing her monthly inspection of the vault where the daguerreotype remained secured. The ritual had become something of a compulsion, checking the seals, ensuring the temperature and humidity controls were functioning, verifying that the binding showed no signs of weakening. The portrait itself had been sealed in a custom-built container of silver-infused lead, marked with warning symbols drawn from Thomas Caldwell's original binding. Eliza had no idea if these additional precautions were effective, but they provided some peace of mind. As she completed her inspection and prepared to leave, her phone rang, an unlisted number. "Hello," she answered cautiously. "Ms. Thornton. This is Dr. Abernathy from the genetics lab at MUSC. The voice was professional, but carried an undercurrent of excitement. "I'm calling about your annual physical results." Eliza tensed. She had been required to undergo a thorough medical examination to qualify for the director position, including blood work. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong exactly," Dr. Abernathy said, "but highly unusual. Your genetic markers show some anomalies I've never encountered before. I'd like you to come in for some additional tests, if possible." "What kind of anomalies?" Eliza asked, though she feared she already knew. "Well, that's just it," the doctor replied. "Some of your DNA sequences don't match any known human patterns. In fact, they don't match any terrestrial species we've catalogued. I've sent the samples to colleagues at Johns Hopkins for verification, but I thought you should know immediately." Eliza closed her eyes, suppressing a shudder. "Thank you, Doctor. I'll call to schedule those tests soon." After ending the call, she stared at the vault door for a long moment. The binding was changing her at a fundamental level, just as Elizabeth had warned. The question was, how far would the transformation go? And what would it mean for the binding itself? Her phone buzzed with a text message. Another unlisted number, but not the doctor's. "The veil thins with each passing day. 1 year down. Many more to go, but fewer than you think." Attached was a photograph of the ocean at night, taken from Charleston's harbor. Nothing unusual was visible in the image itself, but Eliza felt a prickling sensation across her shoulder blades as she looked at it, a recognition of something lurking just beyond the frame, watching and waiting. She deleted the message and pocketed her phone. Then, with a silent promise to remain vigilant, she sealed the vault and turned to leave, knowing that whatever changes were happening within her, whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as Thomas Caldwell had, with courage, determination, and the hope that her efforts would protect not just Charleston, but the world beyond, from what lurked beneath the veil. As she stepped outside into the cool evening air, Eliza gazed up at the stars reflecting in the harbor waters. For a brief, disorienting moment, she couldn't tell where the night sky ended and the ocean began, as if the boundary between them had begun to blur. The veil was thinning indeed, and she would be ready when it finally lifted.